Good evening, friends. Welcome back for part 2 of the Maimer Va'ata Tetzave. Before we begin, I would like to just remind everybody that we're going to be learning from the text of the Nurturing Faith by the Kahat Publication Society. You may have a copy at home, a hard copy. If you don't, you can download the PDF on jnet.org/mamer. That's where you can download it, and then open it for optimal reading to make it easier to follow the Hebrew and the English, which we will be reading. When you open up your PDF in a Mac, you can open it in Preview, click on View, and then click on Two-Page View. If you're opening it up on a PC, if you open it in the Adobe PDF Reader, click on View, and in Page View, I think it is, you'll find 2 pages. And if you view 2 pages side by side, the English and Hebrew should be lined up, and it would be easier to follow along in the text. So to review what we've been reading so far, what we read in the last class, we quoted the verse Va'ata Tetzave, the verse from Exodus, where God says to Moses, "You shall command the Jewish people, the children of Israel, to bring to you pure olive oil crushed for the luminary, to raise up a constant flame." We asked 4 questions, and we already answered 2 of them in the text, where we explained that the Ata Tetzave B'nai Yisrael. We explained the verse in the mystical and Hasidic interpretation and understanding based on a discourse by the Rebbe's father-in-law, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, his famous discourse from 1927, where he explains that what God is saying here, what the verse is telling us, is that Moses Tetzave, not that he commands, but that he connects the Jewish people with God. We said by him connecting the Jewish people to God, he's enhanced. That's the meaning of Yikhu Elecha. So Va'ata Tetzave B'nai Yisrael, God says that Moshe, you connect the Jewish people. Through that, they will bring to you, you will be enhanced. They'll bring pure olive oil, which will be crushed for the luminary. And we explained crushed for the luminary means that through the crushing, through the difficulties, the hardships and challenges in exile, we reach the luminary, not the light, the illumination, but the luminary, the source of light. And the final question which we needed to address, and we'll get to in a later class, is the constant flame. Why it says the constant flame, we'll leave that for another time. But we explained that Moses connects the Jewish people, and we said that that's by nurturing their faith. That faith naturally seems to be abstract. In other words, it doesn't seem to impact our daily conscious behavior. And Moses, his job, the meaning of connecting the Jewish people, is that he's a faithful shepherd, or a shepherd that nurtures the faith of the people, so that their faith is something that is impactful on their lives. It informs their behavior and their life. We then explained Kasis Lamor, that by being crushed, we reach the source of light. And so we concluded last class with a question that, based on the flow in the previous Rebbe's discourse, first he explains that Moses nurtures the faith. Then he goes on to explain that Mordechai, in the time of the story of Purim, nurtured the faith of the Jewish people and brought them to a state of self-sacrifice. And afterwards he explains that through the challenges in exile, we reach the source of light. But this idea of Kasis Lamor, that through the difficulty, through being crushed in exile, we reach the source of light, seems to have no connection with the idea that Moses, and subsequently his representatives, or his offshoots, as they're referred to here, the Moses of later generations, the fact that they nurture the faith seems to have no connection with the idea that through challenges in exile we reach the source of light. So we need to understand what the connection is. How is it that Moses nurturing the faith of the people that leads into through crushing we reach the source of light? So now, in order to understand that, we need to understand first what it means when we say that Moses nurtures the faith of the people. And before we can understand what it means that Moses nurtures the faith, first we need to know what faith is. It always helps when we know what we're talking about to give us a clearer understanding of the subject. So now in chapter 5, we're going to explore the idea of faith, and from that we will see Moses' contribution, and the Moses of every generation, their contribution and impact on the faith of the people, and through that we'll be able to understand the connection between that and the fact that through exile we reach the source of, through the challenges in exile we reach the source of light. But in order to help us understand what we're about to read, I'd like to preface it with a question, or frame the conversation now in a question, which is not asked explicitly in the text, but it'll help us, this question I think will help us understand what we're going to learn. In the last class, we quoted from the Talmud when we talked about faith and the fact that faith needs sometimes to be nurtured, and that we can have faith and yet it doesn't inform our behavior. And we brought an example mentioned in the Talmud from a thief who, right before he breaks into a home, prays to God. And we explained that he clearly has faith in God, and he has a great faith in God, and yet somehow that faith doesn't prevent him from violating God's commandments, from breaking into a home. And that we seem to mock somebody like that. But the truth of the matter is that faith naturally shouldn't impact our behavior. In a sense, what the Talmud is telling us is not mocking the thief who's about to break in, but really giving us a profound, deeper insight into the impact faith has on us. And he tells us that you can have faith, and yet the faith has no effect on your daily life, no effect on your behavior. And in truth, that's the nature of faith. That faith shouldn't inform us. Why is that? So we're going to use terms now in tonight's class, the term makif and pnimi. Makif, which we mentioned these terms, I believe, last class. Makif means transcendent, and pnimi means immanent. Those are sort of the best working translations that we will use. So faith is transcendent, meaning what's immanent, what informs our decisions, what informs our daily life, what informs our behavior is the things that we understand, the things that we associate with, the things that are in our human experience. Things that are outside of our experience, we may be aware of them, we may know of them, but since they're outside of our own experience, they don't necessarily impact us. When we talk about faith, faith begins where our intellect ends. In other words, there's only so much we can understand. What we don't understand gets left to the realm of faith, which is intellectual. It's an intelligent person knows that there's more than what he understands, and there's more to life than that. And so certainly our lives are led with faith in all kinds of things. But faith is beyond what we can observe and understand. And so therefore, faith naturally is transcendent. It doesn't have that impact on our lives that, say, really understanding and knowing something firsthand and observing something firsthand would have on ourselves. So if that's the case, if that's the nature of faith, then how is it that Moses can bring the faith that is transcendent into a panemius? It sounds nice. But how is it possible to bring something that's transcendent into immanence, bring it into us, make it immanent? An example given elsewhere for makif and pnimi, for transcendence and immanence, is clothing and food. Where clothing and food both impact us, a man needs both clothing and food to survive, and yet clothing are transcendent, meaning they don't enter the person, they're outside the person, whereas food enters the body, it enters the individual, enters the person. Excuse me for a moment. Sorry about that. And so to say that Moses takes our faith and brings it into a pnimius, makes it immanent, is kind of like saying that you feed somebody clothing. Rather than feeding them food, you feed them clothing. But what nutritional value is there in eating clothing? So faith is in the realm of transcendence and seems to be outside of impacting our lives in any real tangible way. Whereas here we're saying that Moses brings the faith into a pnimius. So that's a question that I think will help us understand what we're about to read now in chapter 5. So let's read. We're going to read chapter 5. It's on page 46 and 47 in the book and on the PDF. And again, as I mentioned, if you can have a two-page view, you will be able to follow along easier. So we can explain where we left off from the last class, from the previous chapters, to understand the connection between being crushed that leads to the luminary, leads to the essence, and the role that Moses plays in nurturing the faith of the people. We can understand it al pi hayedua, based on what is known. That the reason that the Jewish people naturally believe in God with simple, pure faith and don't need proof is for two reasons. We know that the Jewish people are called maminim b'nei maminim, believers, children of believers. And so naturally a Jew has a perfect, sincere, simple faith in God and doesn't need proofs, naturally, that wouldn't need proof of God's existence. Why is that? Why wouldn't a Jew need proof of God's existence? So there are two reasons. The first one is Lefi shemazlayu chazi, because his mazel sees. What does this mean? Mazlayu chazi is a quote from the Talmud, tractate Megillah, right at the beginning, where the Talmud quotes a verse in Daniel, where Daniel mentions that he alone saw this vision, but the people that were with him didn't see the vision, yet they were overcome with a great fear. And so the Talmud asks, if the people that were with Daniel didn't see the vision, why would they be overcome with fear? If Daniel sees the vision, so maybe he should be overcome with fear. Why would the people who didn't see the vision why weren't they overcome with fear? And so the Talmud answers, because even though they didn't see, mazlayu chazi, their mazel saw. And here we explain what mazel means. What does that mean? So generally, when we think of the term mazel, the first thing that comes to mind is astrology. The Talmud elsewhere, the Talmud at the end of tractate Shabbos, talks about whether there's mazel for the Jewish people, whether we're beholden to the signs of the zodiac, and whether those forces of nature, whether those forces of nature play a role in our destiny. And so it's discussed in the Talmud whether that's the case. The prevailing opinion is that ein mazel li Yisrael, that we are not we're not subject to the laws and the rules of the astrological signs, and ein mazel li Yisrael, we can always change our destiny. So there, mazel means your destiny and the zodiac, the forces of nature. And there we say that the Jewish people don't have mazel. And here we're saying that we do have mazel. What mazel are we referring to? So here we're talking about the higher level of the soul. The soul has many levels, and it's only the lowest level of the soul that actually enters the body. The higher level of the soul, and this, I don't want to go off on a tangent, so we'll just leave it at this, but this is another example of makif and pnimi at work here, where there's a part of the soul that's pnimi, a part of the soul that enters the body, and another part that's makif that remains outside the body. The body is not able to handle that intense energy of the soul. The soul is too great for the body, and so therefore that part remains transcendent, remains outside of the body. That part of the soul is called mazel. Why is it called mazel? Because the experiences of the higher level of the soul that doesn't enter the body inform the body in sort of subliminal ways. And so what happens is the soul, as it is above, experiences something, and then mazil, it causes that experience to drip. Mazil, which means to cause something to drip, or nozel, all the same root of this, the root to the same, has the same root, the same word, that it means that it informs in a subliminal way, in a subconscious way, the soul, the conscious part of the soul that's in the body. And so that's why it's called mazil, because on a subconscious level, it affects the soul. That's also why sometimes you might wake up and feel inspired, and you didn't do anything the day before to lead you to this inspiration, this moment of inspiration, and yet sometimes we're inspired, sometimes we're feeling great, we're in better moods, and the reason for that is because our soul, on a subconscious level, the soul that's above, that doesn't enter the body, is experiencing some form of inspiration, something that it experiences, and it translates itself in our conscious selves as inspiration, as wanting to do good, wanting to repent, and so on and so forth. That's a subliminal message coming from the higher part of the soul, the part that's transcendent. So the first reason why we believe in God is lefisha mazlayu chazi, because our mazel, the soul, as it is above, sees. The neshama, the soul, as it is above, sees godliness, seeing which is higher than understanding. Sometimes the only way you can understand something or process something that you've heard, for instance, is by understanding it. If you hear a lecture and you didn't understand the word, then you're not going to be able to retain or absorb any of that information. It's not going to have any impact. But when you see something, you can see it and it'll impact you even if you didn't understand what you saw, but you saw it. So we're talking about seeing that's beyond understanding. This causes the neshama, the soul in the body, to have faith in God. And again, the term here is faith because it's not something you understand. It's not something that is conscious. It is something that is beyond, something that is transcendent, something we don't understand. And so it translates as a natural faith that we have, since on some level our soul sees godliness. And that's why naturally we have a belief in God, since our soul sees God on some level. The Oid Biur, another explanation to why we are naturally believers, is the Sheidish or Amunah humi etzem haneshama shelamayla memazli chazi. Because the source of the faith stems not from what the neshama sees, but from the essence of the neshama, from the essence of the soul, which is higher than this level of mazli chazi, the level of where the soul sees God. That which the essence of the soul is connected with God is an essential bond, which is not dependent on any reason, not even on seeing, which is beyond understanding, which is beyond intellect. So the first level is a lower level of this higher part of the soul that is beyond that is too high to come into the person, and that level sees godliness. So there's the soul that has its own sort of independent existence, and then there's godliness, and the soul sees God on that level. It's not an intellectual experience because it's even that vision that it sees is beyond understanding, but it sees godliness, and so therefore it believes. And then you have a deeper level of the soul, the essence of the soul, where the soul is one with God. Right? What would come to mind is what the Alter Rebbe writes in the beginning of chapter 2 of Tanya, where he introduces us to the godly soul, that it's a part of God. The essence of the soul is essentially bound with God. It is one with God. And so therefore, that belief in God is not something external. It's not something dependent on another reason. It's not something from outside of the soul. It is its very definition, its very essence. The Eshleimar, we continue now on page 48 and 49. So what's the difference between these two levels of the soul's connection with God, whether it sees God or it is essentially one with God? Is the halmuna b'haneshama hamelubeshes baguf haba miri'iyas haneshama shelamayla b'bchinas makif. We can see the difference between these two levels of the source of our faith. We can see it as it relates to the soul as it comes into the body. That the faith that stems from the soul seeing God comes down into us in a transcendent nature, in a transcendent way. The example that we gave earlier from the thief, where there's faith, but the faith is transcendent. It's not immanent in the person. It doesn't transform the person. The kivan since the part of the soul that sees godliness isn't in the body, as we mentioned earlier, it's too great to be in the body, so therefore its experiences are also too intense for the soul that's in the body. If it wasn't too intense, it would also be in the body. But the body is not able to handle that part of the soul. It's too intense for it. And so therefore its experience comes down into the soul that's in the body in a transcendent way. Because the body can't contain the experience of the higher part of the soul. That's why the higher part of the soul isn't in the body to begin with, or it transcends the body. So in order for the faith that for the faith that we have in our conscious selves, for the neshama, for the soul that's in the body, for our conscious selves to have faith that is imminent, that is impactful, that's through revealing the essential bond that of the essence of the soul, its essential nature, which is godliness. That it is connected essentially with God. So in other words, to answer the question we opened the class with, transcendent faith doesn't become immanent. If it's transcendent, it's in the realm of transcendence. It's something that's beyond our experience, and therefore it can only affect us in a transcendent, sort of abstract, impersonal way. So how do we have faith that is personal, that is immanent, that is impactful? The only way to have that faith is by having faith that it stems from the essence of the soul. Why is that? Because, as we mentioned, when we talk about levels of the soul, so you have the higher level and the lower level can be absorbed into the body, can impact the body in an immanent way. The higher part is too intense, it's too high, it's too abstract, and so therefore it affects the body, impacts it in an abstract, in a distant way. But when we talk about the essence of the soul, essence is everywhere equally. The essence of the soul is the essence of the soul as it is above, and it's the essence of the soul as it is below. An example for this would be when we talk about the powers of the soul. We talk about our powers. You have the soul has the potential for sight, it has the potential for hearing, for speaking, and those are abstract potentials, powers of the soul. In order for the power of the soul to be of speech, for instance, to be realized, it needs to be in the mouth. When it's in the mouth, the lips and the teeth and the tongue and the palate and so on, then that gives expression to that power of the soul, because that's a specific power that needs to be in its proper spot in order to express itself. Same thing is with the ability to see. When the power to see enters the eye, then you have an expression of that power that's manifested in seeing, in sight. But the power to see, if it were to enter the arm, for instance, the arm won't start to see. The arm is not able to handle that specific type of power. That power, the power to see, is too spiritual for the more physical arm, and so therefore it won't have that effect. And the same thing is with the impact that each power of the soul has on the rest of the body. Depending on how close it is with that part, it'll have some form of effect. But when we talk about the essence of the soul, we're not talking about a specific power. When we talk about the essence of the soul, or understand in our context, the essence of life, which is the life force of the soul, that's already the essence of the soul. It's life force. That life force is equal everywhere in the body. And that's why, for instance, when somebody's in a life-threatening situation, they behave in an entirely different way than before. Suddenly they can hear better, they can see better, they become almost superhuman. For some they find in themselves strength. All their powers, the power to see, the power to hear, all these senses and all these potentials of the soul are operating on optimal level. Why are they operating that way? Because the essence of all of these powers is life. And since life is being threatened, so it's the essence of all these powers, all these components of the soul, and so therefore it affects the body, every part of the body, in a very real and tangible way, since it's the essence of all of the body. So the same thing is here. When we talk about the level of the soul, the higher level of the soul, we're talking about levels of souls. So depending on where the level is, how high it is, and how low it's supposed to go, it'll have various degrees of effect on the soul, on the person. But when we talk about the essence isn't closer to one level or closer to another level, higher or lower. The essence is the essence of all of the person, all of the soul. And so therefore, when we reveal that essence, it affects the person in an immanent way. Another point, when we talk about affecting in an immanent way, so generally the analogy we gave earlier about seeing that goes into the eye, so those are specific powers that go into specific parts of the body that serve to express those powers. So generally that's also referred to as pnimi. The power of seeing would be an immanent power that expresses itself in the eye. And that's why it has that effect. The eye starts to see. But when we're talking about pnimius here, when we're talking about immanence here with regards to the essence of the soul, we're talking about a different type of immanence. We're talking about that the essence of whatever it is that we're the soul in the body, or whatever part of the body we're talking about, it's the essence of all of it. And so it's not that it's something that relates to it and so therefore can impact it in an immanent way. It is its very essence. It is one with that level of whatever it's, whether it's the higher level, whether it's the lower level. It's the essence of all of those levels equally. And so we're talking about a much deeper level of panemius, of immanence, when we're talking about the essence of the soul and its impact on the body. So now we can understand the connection or the sequence that's mentioned in the discourse in the previous Rebbe's discourse from 1927. The sequence we're specifically referring to the fact that this discussion on Kassis here is in parentheses because we're going to focus more on Ma'or. Kassis we'll explore a little bit later. That the idea of Ma'or, of reaching the essence, follows his discussion on Raya Mehemna, on the role of Moshe and of the Moshe of every generation, the faithful shepherd. Moshe zon umefarnes eso amuna shetia b'pnimius wa al yideshu megales etzem haneshama shelamayla memazli chazi moir shelamayla me'or. Now we can understand the picture. When we say that Moses nurtures the faith so that it has a conscious effect, impact, and it's immanent within the person, so we're not talking about the level of mazli chazi, the level of the higher level of the soul seeing godliness. Why? Because that, as we mentioned, that isn't immanent. It, by its very definition, remains transcendent. So if Moshe is going to bring faith to the Jewish people that's going to be immanent, then the faith that he's activating in the Jew is the faith that comes from the essence of the soul, which is Ma'or, the source of light. We mentioned when we asked the question in the first class about the terminology in the verse, where it says Ma'or, we're talking about lighting the menorah. The menorah was lit so that it gives off light, illumination. And yet we said that we're preparing the oil for Ma'or, for the luminary, for the source of light. And so we explained that the source of light means the essence of the light. And so here, when the Rebbe explains this idea of Ma'or, of reaching the source of light, meaning reaching the essence, that follows his discussion on Moshe and his role in nurturing the faith of the people. Because once Moshe nurtures the faith, in other words, he reveals or activates that essence of the soul, so then what's expressed is the essence of the soul, and so therefore the faith becomes an imminent, impactful faith. And the fact that it says Kassis Lama'or, crushed for a luminary, so what we need to still understand is, why does it say Kassis Lama'or? We explained in the last class, Kassis means crushed, meaning through the hardships of exile we reach the source of light. So why does he mention that? It would seem that we go from Moses nurturing the faith of the Jewish people, accessing and activating the essence of the soul, that would lead to Ma'or. Why is it Kassis Lama'or, crushed? Where does crushed, the hardships of exile, what role do they play? So he explains that the reason for that is because the expression of that level of the soul, how do we know that you're expressing the essence of your soul? It's specifically through Mesiras Nefesh, through self-sacrifice, which we'll explain in the next chapter. Because the main expression of the essence of the soul, how do we know that we're activating or accessing that level of the soul, the essence of the soul, the level of the soul which is one with God? That's expressed primarily through the self-sacrifice that is experienced during the time of exile. So to sum up chapter 5, in chapter 5 we were introduced to two types of faith. One faith that stems from the higher level of the soul that sees God, that has a transcendent, impersonal effect and impact on the soul that's in the body and on the conscious person. And then we have the essence of the soul which doesn't see godliness. It is godliness. It is not separate. It's not a separate thing that sees godliness. And so in chapter 5 we explain the difference between these two levels. That the first level, the level of seeing, there's a reason involved here, and it's a transcendent level, and so therefore it has the impact that it has on the body is one that is transcendent, one that's not immanent, not personal, not impactful. But the second level, it is expressed through being immanent, and that's because the essence of the soul is the essence of every level of the soul, regardless of how high it is on the chain, whether it's above, whether it's transcendent, whether it's below, and immanent, doesn't matter. the essence of it remains the same. And so therefore, when that's revealed, it is revealed in an imminent way, because it's the essence of that, even that the conscious self. Now in chapter 6, as we just finished the end of chapter 5, we're going to explore the expression, how we see the difference, the practical difference between these two levels of the soul. So we got there's the transcendent faith, there's the immanent faith, but in practical terms, what's the difference between them? So that we're going to explore in chapter 6. Before we do that, I'm going to take a quick look at the chat. Unless I'm doing something wrong, it seems to be quiet. And so we'll give it a moment, and if anybody has any questions, I can try to address them, and then we will continue with chapter 6 on page 51. Let's continue now, I guess, with chapter 6. So we're on page 50 and 51 in the text. So what is the practical meaning of how we conclude chapter 5, that the primary expression of the essence of the soul, the faith that comes from the essence of the soul, is in self-sacrifice? Or in other terms, what's the difference between how does the transcendent level of faith, coming from the higher level of the soul, seeing God, differ from the expression of the essence of the soul's faith? So the fact that a Jew's faith causes him or her to give his life, to be willing to give his or her life for that faith, that stems primarily from the essence of the soul, the faith that comes from the essence of the soul. Why is that? Because the hamuna mitzad zeh shehu roya mazle chazi, because the faith that stems from seeing, from his mazel seeing, from the higher level of the soul seeing, hagamshi b'toikev gadol, even though that is very impactful. We're not going to disparage or minimize the impact that seeing has. Like they say, seeing is believing. So seeing is very impactful. As we know that the impact from seeing is very great. And as he says in footnote Lamed Gimel here in the text, which is I believe note 75 in the English text, he points out, he quotes from the Talmud in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, that the law is that an aid, a witness, can't be a judge. If you've witnessed a crime, you can't sit in judgment of that crime. Why is that? The reason is because since you witnessed it, you'll never be able to come up with a reason to acquit the perpetrator. And we know that in the Jewish legal system, we do whatever we can to come up with a reason, not necessarily for an acquittal. We're not going to get controversial here, but at least to find some merit for the accused. And so but why is it that we're adding this idea? It would seem that the idea that seeing is believing, or that seeing is very impactful on a person, when you see something that has a great impact, that would seem to be self-understood. What are we adding here with the footnote? So it's interesting. Obviously, if you understand something, you study something, you understand it very well, so it'll be very difficult for somebody to get you to change your opinion about something. But it's possible. So you can understand something very well and therefore form a certain opinion. Somebody can come along and make a very good argument and sway you, maybe not even convince you, but at least to create reasonable doubt. But when you see something, even something you don't understand, while somebody might try to explain to you what you saw, so you understood it one way, they can explain to you another way, but nobody can challenge the actual seeing, the experience of seeing something. That is something that will be embedded, and that's deeply embedded in the person. When we say ein eid nasa dayin, we're saying that the idea that the impact that seeing has is so great that it actually has an effect even on your mind. When a judge sits in judgment, he sits and he hears two cases, he'll hear two opinions, two sides of a story. And in America, I think we have a sort of a comparable concept, the idea of beyond reasonable doubt. That sometimes the defense's job is only to create reasonable doubt. In other words, that they don't even have to prove that the defendant is innocent. They just need to get the judge or the jury to have reasonable doubt as to whether they're guilty. In other words, the jury might think very well that the defendant is guilty. The defendant committed the crime, the evidence is overwhelming and compelling. But if there's reasonable doubt, meaning I think he committed the crime, but I could entertain the thought that maybe he didn't for whatever reason, that's enough for an acquittal. But if you see something, if you've seen the crime, then the greatest defense attorney won't be able to get you to have reasonable doubt. There's no room for reasonable doubt. In other words, it has such a profound effect on the person that any reason, logic, it's not going to sway you in any way. And so we see the impact that seeing has. Yet, mikol makom, kivan she'amuna sheloi mitzad siba, mitzad zeh ve'ein k'shurim etzem mitziyusei einin muchakshim ser nafshei al zeh. Nevertheless, as impactful as seeing is on a person, as much as seeing something becomes embedded in your soul, it's still something else. It's something that you saw. So the something that you saw has now seared an image, an experience in your soul. But it's still something else that you saw. It's still two separate things. Therefore, just because you saw it, just because you experienced it, doesn't mean you're going to give your life for it. So I know it's true. I know it exists. I have no reasonable, I'm not even capable of entertaining a thought of a doubt. But so what? What effect does that have on my life? Yet the fact that a person is willing to, or not willing, but has no choice but to give his life for something, it is because the faith and godliness is his essence. So therefore, it is not at all possible for him to deny God, God forbid. When we talk about denying God, God forbid, so what are we talking about? If somebody comes and tells a Jew, either deny God or they're going to take his life. So what's going on? Does the enemy who's threatening the person's life, does the enemy know what's going through a person's mind? Essentially, all they want is for a person to act in defiance of God, act as if they deny God. So it's possible. So a person, in other words, that has faith that stems from seeing godliness, coming to them and threatening their life by telling them to deny God, you're not going to be able to get them to not believe in God. They see him on some level. That's embedded. But just because I see him doesn't mean that the person's willing to give his life to not do a meaningless, hollow act. But when the faith in God is your very essence, your very existence, then even a hollow act is something that you're not capable of. Not only that it's not a choice, there's no process of choosing. The person is incapable. It's like saying, either kill yourself or I'll kill you. What are the choices? The choices are exactly one and the same. There's no choice here. Because either way, he's denying his very essence. By allowing the person to take his life, or by denying God, either way, he is denying his very essence. And so it's not even a matter of choice. So even when we talk about the first level of faith, the level of seeing godliness, it's possible for a person to give his life. It's possible that his faith in God is so strong and so meaningful that he says, I've decided to give my life for my faith in God. That's possible. Still, there are two things at work here. There's the person, there's God, and his decision to give his life. But when we talk about the faith that stems from the essence of the soul, here there's no decision. The person doesn't go through a process of weighing his options. Let me think about it for a moment. The person is not capable of denying God, even in an external hollow act, because it's denying his very essence, and that the person is not capable of doing. That now we can understand why in the discourse the previous Rebbe discusses the fact that the Raya Mehemna, that Moshe, who nurtures the faith, is true also about the shepherds of Israel, the shepherds of the Jewish people in every generation, or the Spashtus of the Moshe B'chol, the offshoot of Moses, as is mentioned in Kabbalah, in every generation. That they strengthen the faith so that the Jewish people will be willing to experience self-sacrifice, to sacrifice their lives for the observance of Torah and mitzvahs. What do we need to understand? In the previous Rebbe's discourse, he discusses Moses, and he says that Moses nurtured the faith of the people, that the faith becomes something that's imminent, impactful. And now, based on what we've said so far in verse 6 and chapter 6 and what we mentioned in chapter 5, we know that we're talking about a level of faith that stems from the essence of the soul. But what is Moses' act that he's doing? He's bringing faith into a pneumius. Faith is impactful, it's imminent. And that is because he's accessing the essential faith that the Jew has from the essence of the soul. But then he turns his attention to Mordechai, he turns his attention to the offshoot of Moses in every generation, and explains that the Moses of every generation does the same thing. He nurtures the faith so that the people will have self-sacrifice. But who's talking about self-sacrifice? We're talking about nurturing faith so that it's imminent, that it's impactful. Who mentioned anything about self-sacrifice? Why does he go from discussing Moses impacting the faith, that it becomes imminent, to talking about the offshoots of Moses, the Mordechais, and so on, who cause the people to have self-sacrifice? What's the connection? Because when we talked about Moses, and even in the previous Rebbe's discourse itself, he talks about Moses' role in nurturing the faith of the people, and he says, how does he nurture the faith of the people? By giving them das in godliness. I think we just experienced an interruption. I hope we're back on. Das in godliness means, das is the intellectual faculty that anchors the intellect to the emotions. But really, das is sort of a broader term that would mean, that would really connote the idea of connection, of immanence. So Moses nurtures the das, or provides the people, his people, with das, meaning that they can take that faith, and that faith doesn't remain abstract, but it's something that becomes personal, it's something that becomes impactful in their life. So what's Moses doing? He's shepherding faith by nurturing the das, and that nurturing das, right, means that he's bringing the faith into an imminent, impactful form. And that's the role of Moses. That's what's discussed in Tanya and many other discourses, and including this discourse, the discourse of the previous Rebbe himself, where he talks about the offshoots of Moses doing exactly as Moses does by nurturing the das, that level of knowledge or imparting knowledge to the people that allows them to anchor that faith, or to express that level of the faith that comes from the essence of the soul. And yet we go back to talking about the shepherds of Israel in other generations strengthening the faith so that it expresses itself in self-sacrifice. So what's the connection? So now, based on what we discussed in the beginning of chapter 6, we can understand the connection. As we mentioned, the faith that comes from the essence of the soul is naturally imminent. That's the type of faith it is. Since it's from the essence of the soul is imminent in all parts of the soul. So therefore, the faith is also imminent because it's faith that comes from the essence of the soul. So that's what Moses does. But as we explained, the expression of that faith, how do we know that you're accessing that faith? When a person is willing to, not only willing, when a person is incapable of not sacrificing themselves. When a person is naturally inclined to experience self-sacrifice, not by choice, but because that cuts to his very essence, that's an expression, a manifestation of that level of faith. So based on what we explained, we can say who now the Rebbe is giving us a deeper insight into this role of Moses. We quoted in the first class from the Zohar, where it says that the shepherd, that Moses, is zon umefarnes eso amuna. He feeds and nourishes or sustains the faith. And we explained it simply, the simple understanding of it, which is that he nurtures the faith of the people. And here, the Rebbe is offering us a deeper insight into this passage that was hiding in plain sight, which is that in the Zohar, it doesn't say that he nurtures the people with faith, that he nurtures the people, or that he feeds them a faith that can be fed. It says that he nurtures the faith. In other words, not that he nurtures the Jewish people and brings them faith, but that he's nurturing the faith itself, the very faith itself. So we see that the Iker, he underlines Iker, that the primary role of the Raya Me'emin, of the faithful shepherd, is that he nurtures and feeds the faith itself. So that the faith is not something that just comes from a revelation of godliness that it sees, but from its very essence, which is its essential bond with God. In other words, when the Zohar says that Moses is zonu mefarnes es amuna, that he feeds and nurtures the faith, what it's saying is that he's accessing a different faith. The normal faith, the conventional faith we talk about, is faith that comes from seeing godliness, from the revelation of godliness that the soul sees above in heaven. And now we're saying that Moses' role is that not that he takes that faith and brings that into an imminent expression in the person, but that he accesses a different level of faith, that he reveals the essence of the soul. And since he's revealing the essence of the soul, naturally it is imminent, because that's the nature of essence, that it is imminent, it's present in all levels of the person. That which Moshe draws this faith into pnimius, into das and hasaga, into understanding, intellect, meaning into an immanence, into the person's experience. That's a result of what he's doing. In other words, it's not that Moses causes the faith to be immanent. Moses accesses a higher level of faith, a different level of faith. And the fact that that faith is now immanent is a direct result of the faith that he's accessing. That's the revelation of the expression of the faith that comes from the essence of the soul. And as we explained in chapter 5, that the drawing of the faith into the faith becoming immanent faith can only be immanent when it's an expression of the faith that comes from the essence of the soul. Based on this, we can understand why the previous Rebbe in his discourse starts talking about Moses nurturing faith, that it should be bedas v'asaga, that the faith should be imminent, that Moses' role is that he brings the faith down, that the faith is imminent, and then he continues, seemingly, he goes off to something else, which is that the Moses in later generations bring out Mesiras Nefesh, that their nurturing faith is that the person should have, that the Jews should have experienced self-sacrifice. Why is that? So he says, the fact that in later generations, when they needed self-sacrifice, when they actually needed self-sacrifice, the shepherds, the Moses of those generations, strengthened the faith so that they should have self-sacrifice. So there, here, the role of Moses is expressed even more so than it was expressed in Moses' own doing. Because the primary expression of the essence of the soul is in self-sacrifice. In other words, Moses, in his generation, we'll talk about later, we'll mention, that his generation didn't need self-sacrifice. So what did he do? He accessed that essential bond that the Jew experiences, that the soul experiences, where it's one with God. And therefore, the symptom, so to speak, for that is that faith was on a conscious level. So Moses nurture the faith or the knowledge, the understanding, meaning the conscious Jew, and that the conscious Jew should be impacted by his faith, which comes from the essence of the soul. But how do we know that it's the essence of the soul that's working here? So, in other words, the fact that it's imminent is just a symptom or an expression of the soul. But where do we see the soul's impact? Where do we see the soul at work? The essence of the soul, that higher level of faith at work, when as a result of it, the person has self-sacrifice. Let's pause now for some questions before continuing with chapter 7. I see, do you like Coca-Cola? Read this. I'm assuming that's a comment, not a question. Okay, let's continue now with chapter 7. It is known that the self-sacrifice, the actual self-sacrifice, not just the potential for it, because certainly Moses' generation, should they have needed self-sacrifice, would have had it since they accessed their essential faith in God. But where did it actually occur? It occurred during Purim, as we discussed in chapter 4 of the discourse in the last class. That's when during the time of the decree of Haman, that's when the Jewish people, all of the Jews, experienced self-sacrifice for Torah and the observance of the commandments. The self-sacrifice expressed by the Jewish people during the episode of Hanukkah wasn't all the Jewish people. It was Matisyahu and his children and the Maccabees. It was those that rose up to rebel against the Assyrian Greeks. But it wasn't everybody. Whereas the self-sacrifice during the time of Haman's decree was with all the Jewish people, as we pointed out, we discussed when we were studying chapter 4 in the last class. Now we can understand why in his discourse from 1927, the previous Rebbe quotes the Medrash that Mordechai in his generation was equal to Moses in his generation, even though we single out Mordechai, because even though there's an offshoot of Moshe in every generation, we call Makim Isa b'Medrash Mordechai Dafka Hayishakal b'Deri K'Moshe b'Deri. The Medrash chooses Mordechai from all the Jewish leaders of all the generations. The Medrash chooses to say that Mordechai was like Moses. Why is that? Why specifically? Why single out Mordechai from all the other Moseses that must be equal to Moshe on some level? So Yeshleimar Shem Hamail is the Mordechai HaYehudi who Harayim Mehem Nebigiloi Shel Kol Yisrael Shebederi. That one of the advantages of Mordechai was that he was the shepherd of all the Jewish people in a revealed sense in his generation. Similar to Moshe, who was the undisputed leader of his people in his generation, that he was the only one who nurtured the das, or broadened the understanding and the conscious experience of the Jewish people of his generations, the conscious experience of their essence of their soul. We see that Moshe, not only was he the undisputed leader of his people, but more than that, he impacted his entire generation. He impacted all the people. In fact, all the people, the generation of Moses, is called a generation of das, as the Medrash points out. It was called a Derdeya. In other words, it had the stamp of Moses' effect on the entire generation. But the only thing is that by Moshe, this expressed itself, this idea that he was nurtured the faith of all the Jewish people, expressed itself through the fact that he nurtured the knowledge, the wisdom, or that conscious intellect of the people of his generation. The difference is that where Moshe did it in that he brought das to the people, in other words, that he was able to have the faith inform them in a conscious level. By Mordechai, it went a step further. It had its ultimate expression, which is, or to this point in the discourse, its ultimate expression, which is self-sacrifice. And as we mentioned, Mordechai, just as Moshe affected all his people, to the extent that the Medrash calls this entire generation a generation of Deya, meaning a generation impacted by Moses' efforts, so too, the generation of Purim, all the Jews had self-sacrifice, and that was a result of the efforts of their Moses of Mordechai. And so therefore we see that Moses, that why we can understand why the Medrash singles out Mordechai to say that Mordechai was like the Moses of his generation. V'yashleimar, we can add al yidei shemevi b'hamaymer masha kasav b'medrash shemordechai b'doirei hayashakol k'moishe b'doirei. Through this, that the previous Rabbi in his discourse mentions the Medrash that says that Mordechai in his generation was equal to Moses of his generation. Through this, the Rebbe rules about himself that he is the apparent Rai Mehemna, the shepherd of faith of his entire generation. And we'll note in the footnote 90, where he says that he rules on himself. Why is it that the previous Rebbe ruled this on himself by mentioning the Medrash about Moses, by quoting a Medrash about Mordechai? So it's explained in the note Mem, looks like in the original Hebrew, and here it's in note 90, that when a person, the Mishnah says that you should know before whom you're going to give din v'cheshbon, a judgment and an accounting. And so the question is asked, first you give an accounting, and after the accounting, then comes the judgment. Why does the Mishnah say that first you give a judgment, then an accounting? So there's an explanation that's said, quoting the Baal Shem Tov, based on another passage, where the Mishnah says, Nifroin la'adam midaitei v'shaloi midaitei, that a person is paid, his ultimate payment, reward or punishment, and the like, knowing and unknowing. What does that mean? So he says that first, when a person comes up to heaven in front of the heavenly court, he's shown a person and a person's behavior. And so, and he's asked, after witnessing the behavior, what do you think should happen with this person? What does this person deserve? Having observed what happened, the person passes his judgment. That's midaita, nifroin mimenu midaita. He knowingly passes judgment on the other based on what he saw. And then it's shalei midaita, what he doesn't know, it's that not with his knowledge, is that afterwards he's told, what you just saw, that's what you did. In other words, you just passed judgment on yourself. And so based on that, we can understand why he gives a judgment and then a judgment, then an accounting. First we pass judgment on somebody else, and then comes the accounting where we realize that we're really the ones who we pass judgment on ourselves. So based on this, the Rebbe explains that when the previous Rebbe passes judgment on Mordechai, so he's passing judgment essentially on himself. And if the Rebbe says this about the previous Rebbe, where the previous Rebbe doesn't explain this Medrash, as the Rebbe just did in chapter 7, the previous Rebbe just brings it, he just quotes it. The Rebbe explaining it and quoting this idea of passing judgment on himself and quoting in the note this teaching of Baal Shem Tov, so clearly it's not a stretch to say that the Rebbe is doing the same thing about himself, saying that he is the shepherd of faith of all the people of his generation. Now, the significance of this, of chapter 7, the fact that we talked about Moses, the difference between Mordechai and Moshe, the fact that Moshe, his people didn't need faith, and so it was expressed, the fact that he accessed the essential bond of the Jew with God, that essential, the essence of the soul, was expressed in the fact that his people were called a Dardei, a generation of knowledge. In other words, that they, on a conscious level, they were informed by their faith informed them on a conscious level. And by Mordechai, it went a step further. It had the greater expression, which is through self-sacrifice. All this helps us to answer the question that we asked earlier, which is, what's the connection between Moshe nurturing? We've explained the connection between Moshe nurturing the faith and reaching essence. But what's the connection between Moshe nurturing faith with kasis, with the crushing that leads to the essence? So we've already laid the kernel for that answer, which is that it's through the crushing, through challenges in exile, through being faced with the need to experience self-sacrifice, that effort of Moshe is ultimately expressed, or expressed in the highest form. We'll continue with that thought and get to an even deeper level than what we've explained till now, God willing, in the next class. We'll pause and take a look at the chat, see if there are any questions, and then we'll give it a minute. Seems to be quiet. So with that, I will suggest that if you have any questions, you can respond to the email that will be sent out by JNet, or email them directly with your questions, and hopefully we can address them. And with that, I bid you all a good night.